Tracing and vouching, as promised, we are going to go through these. Sometimes people get confused by these, and I want to make sure you are familiar with it. Now, tracing involves following a specific transaction through the accounting records to determine where it originated and where it ultimately ended up. In contrast, vouching involves examining specific documentation to determine whether a transaction actually occurred and whether it was properly recorded in the accounting records. Now, let's see the differences here. I'm just going to make a nice visualization for you. Tracing and vouching. Now, with tracing, we are going to say, here's the transaction, T tracing, start with the transaction. We're going to find this line item, right? We're going to find this line item, and then we are going to sift through the records to find where it ultimately ended up. So we're going to find this transaction of, let's say we purchased $1 worth of goods. So this is the line item, right? This transaction, $1 worth of goods. And we're going to trace to go find the piece of documentation, whether that's a purchase order or something like that. And we're going to find that, yes, okay, this is a real item we should see in our listing of transactions because here is the purchase order. You actually did buy $1 worth of goods. Now, with vouching, we are actually going to, as we see here, we're going to examine documentation. So, I would definitely memorize this, be quite familiar with it. We're going to start with that purchase order. And both of these are totally valid, totally great ways to audit. And you're going to see in some instances, you're going to want one versus the other, but they're both great. You're going to start with that purchase order, let's say, and then you're going to sort through the accounting records to try to find that $1 purchase on the actual financial statement, presumably through the ledger, the general ledger trial balance. You're going to want to find that amount actually on the financial statement. So reiterate that again because this is pretty dang important. Tracing, you're going to start with a transaction that you find in the ledger, and you're going to try to find the supporting documentation for it. Whereas vouching, you start with the documentation and you try to find that amount within the accounting records. Awesome, awesome. And if I had heard that as clear and concise as what I just said when I was studying, that would have been very nice for me. But unfortunately, didn't get that great of explanation. And I think that's just how the world works. It's sometimes you get good explanations, sometimes you don't. But that's what led me to give just clear, concise, great explanations here, at least in my opinion. Let's see some examples. For better or for worse, this is going to require some big brain time, some thinking through each situation. We're going to have to see the logic in what you're doing. First off, let's say that we can trace shipping documents to pre-numbered sales invoices. So we can trace the documents that prove something was shipped to pre-numbered sales invoices, which should actually match up, right? Because we're saying we shipped 10 pieces of inventory. And here's the invoice saying, here's the bill for 10 pieces of inventory. That is going to provide evidence that shipments to customers were properly invoiced. Now, just before even reading in the next part, as a business, you should do that. You should make sure that what you're shipping is what you're billing for because it could go both ways. You could maybe be not billing enough. You could maybe have shipped 10 pieces of inventory, but for whatever reason, you accidentally are only billing for 9 pieces of inventory. Or it could be vice versa. And it could be that you only shipped 9 and you're billing for 10, which would cause issues with the customers. Now let's see, how is this going to relate to auditing? Well, this would provide support for the completeness assertion for billing, making sure that you have a complete listing in your billing account, that everything is complete and accurate. Next up, our bills of lading to sales invoices to provide evidence that shipments to customers were invoiced, right? This is proof. This is proof that, okay, whatever was shipped was actually invoiced. So similar situation here. It's kind of like the same thing, except, the billing department, invoicing department, it's going to be the same thing there. Just seeing how you can compare different documents to other ones in each situation, even for if it's the same assertion for the same situation, trying to prove the same thing. Lastly, here we've got a sample of purchase orders. So this is the expenditure cycle. You're trying to buy some goods, and the related receiving reports to the purchases journal. So if we're taking some items, we're taking some purchase orders and saying, okay, yeah, I see you on this piece of paper requested 20 pieces of inventory, and then the related receiving reports. Hopefully that report says you did receive 20 pieces of inventory. To the purchases journal, hopefully the accounting records say that you tried to purchase 20 pieces of inventory. And the cash disbursements journal, hopefully this indicates that you paid out cash for 20 pieces of inventory. So you see all of these items should match up. You see how many moving parts there are within each cycle, and it's critical to understand how they all work together. And this is in order to determine that the purchases were properly recorded, aiding and testing the completeness assertion, making sure that you've got you've got a complete listing of all the purchases. Having a good time here. Moving along to an example with vouching, and will have plenty more examples as we go throughout the lesson. Here, we could vouch data for a sample of employees in a payroll register. So there's just a big listing of all our employees that we have to pay out to approved clock card data. We're saying, okay, we've got 10 employees, and here is proving that 10 employees clocked in and worked 8 hours a day to provide assurance that employees work the number of hours for which they're paid. So here, you could say, okay, we've got 10 employees, they work 8 hours a day, and maybe for that, we're going to pay them $200 each, right? So 10 times 200, that should add up with what you see on the clock card data. Different checks, you could call them logic checks, that would help you running a company as an auditor. Understanding the connections here going to be super important. Here is a nice little graphic, nice little table or chart. We've got some differences here. With tracing, we're going to start from the source documents and then move to the accounting records. And then with vouching, we're going to start from the accounting records and move to the source documents. With tracing, the purpose here is to ensure that the transactions or balances that should have been recorded have actually been recorded. And with vouching, the purpose is to ensure that the transactions or balances that have been recorded are accurately supported by pieces of evidence. For tracing, generally this is going to help to test the completeness assertion. And for vouching, this is generally going to help test the occurrence or existence assertion. Lastly here, tracing is going to help you detect the risk of an understatement, and vouching will help you detect the risk of an overstatement. So this is pretty important. This will help you with a lot of nice multiple choice questions, right? Just sit with it, think about it. It's going to help you with all those points.
Hey there! Are you ready to not only pass your CPA exams, but truly understand and enjoy the material while studying? I know it seems impossible, right? Especially to enjoy the material? We'll do it together. Tap into the power of CPA.examprep.ai, where we've got personalized quizzes, multiple choice questions, memorization guides, flashcards, simulations, all tailored to your learning. Our adaptive study planning puts you on the fastest path to success and lifts you back up if you fall behind. Avoid wasting your precious time and money attempting an exam with a low chance of passing, because who wants that? We want to get you through this process as quick as possible. Our exam readiness prediction lets you walk in with confidence, knowing that you're prepared for success on exam day. Thankfully, there's no payment method needed to get started, so why don't you come join us? Visit cpa.examprep.ai and let's achieve your exam success together.